It seems like everywhere you look these days, the Indian stock market is making headlines.
Yeah, it's really grabbing attention globally.
It is. So we're going to try to go a little deeper than just those headlines for this deep dive.
Right.
Our mission for you listening is to unpack those core factors fueling all this impressive growth, but also get into that critical question, is this like a truly robust, sustainable expansion?
Yeah,
Or are there signs pointing to something a little bubblier?
absolutely. That's the key question. I mean, you're hearing a lot of different perspectives on this.
Yeah.
And what we want to do is give you a more structured understanding
Right.
of the fundamental forces at work here.
Okay.
So we're going to be drawing from an analytical report
Okay.
that's been really digging into the dynamics, the risks that are emerging,
Yeah.
and how regulators are responding to all this activity in the Indian stock market.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
The report starts off with like a really striking observation.
Okay.
Just the sheer explosion of retail investors entering the market.
Right.
Apparently, the number of individual trading accounts has quadrupled in just the last 5 years,
Why?
nearing a pretty astounding 200 million.
Huge.
Yeah, and here's where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
For the first time since 2006, the combined holdings of retail investors and mutual funds,
Right.
which is about 18% now, exceed those of foreign institutional investors.
Wow.
That's a pretty big shift in market ownership.
Yeah, that is significant.
So what do we think are the broader implications of this dramatic increase
Yeah.
in individual participation in the Indian economy?
Well, I think what's fascinating here isn't just the number.
Right.
It's what it suggests.
Right.
This fourfold jump in individual accounts.
Yeah.
It indicates a much broader base of individuals
Yeah.
engaging with the stock market.
Yeah.
Now, this shift,
Right.
with domestic investors now holding more sway than foreign institutions,
Right.
it could mean the market might be a little bit more resilient. Yeah. In the face of global financial turbulence,
Right.
although, of course, the behavior of a large number of relatively new traders, it does introduce its own set of dynamics that we'll need to consider.
For sure.
But I think this signifies not just increased participation,
Yeah.
but potentially a deeper integration of the stock market
Right.
to the financial lives of everyday Indians.
Absolutely. And this surge in individual investors directly connects to another point the report highlights:
Okay.
the evolving financial habits of Indian households.
Okay.
So historically, there's been this strong preference for tangible assets, like
Yeah.
real estate and gold.
Right.
But the report points to this clear pivot towards equities recently,
Interesting.
seemingly driven by that pursuit of higher returns,
Yeah, that makes sense.
and as a hedge against inflation.
Mm-hmm.
And they describe this trend as part of a wider financialization of the Indian economy.
Yeah.
I'm curious, from your perspective and what you're seeing outside of this report, what other contributing factors do you think are driving this noticeable shift towards equities?
Well, if we connect this to the larger economic evolution,
Yeah.
this move from physical assets to financial assets like stocks
Right.
often accompanies a maturing economy.
Okay.
The search for better returns
Right.
in a potentially inflationary environment.
Yeah.
That's a natural catalyst.
Right.
And I think the term financialization
Right.
essentially means that financial markets and institutions
Right.
are becoming much more central
Okay.
to how the economy functions.
Right.
And this influences everything from savings and investment
Okay.
to corporate finance,
Okay.
for example.
Right.
We're seeing more companies turning to equity markets for funding and growth,
Okay.
which in turn offers more opportunities for individual investors.
Yeah, and this isn't just like a change in mindset.
Right.
Technology has clearly played a massive role in enabling this shift too, right? The report emphasizes how widespread availability of smartphones and affordable internet
Yeah.
has basically democratized access to the stock market.
Right.
Suddenly, a whole new generation of investors can participate directly through these user-friendly mobile trading platforms,
Right.
which significantly lowers the traditional barriers to entry.
For sure.
So thinking about your own experience,
Yeah.
how has this kind of technological advancement broadly impacted your access to information and opportunities beyond just the financial markets?
That's a really important point you bring up about accessibility.
Yeah.
I mean, technology has undeniably been transformative.
Right.
It's dramatically reduced transaction costs.
Right.
And it's put a wealth of information quite literally at our fingertips.
Yeah.
These mobile platforms have made investing far more convenient and approachable
Right.
for many who might have previously felt excluded. And so this democratization has a lot of positive aspects to it.
Sure.
But as we'll discuss, it also brings forth new challenges
Right.
related to information consumption
Yeah.
and decision-making.
Right, which kind of leads us naturally to some of those potential challenges.
Right.
So the report highlights that the Securities and Exchange Board of India, SEBI, has expressed concerns about this rapid increase in retail activity.
Okay.
There's worry that new and often less experienced investors could be particularly vulnerable to misinformation, that herd mentality where everybody just follows the crowd, and even deliberate market manipulation, which can all contribute to these unsustainable speculative bubbles. So I'm curious, why do you think SEBI might be particularly concerned about the speed and nature of this influx of new investors?
I think it's a valid concern.
Right.
I mean, while greater market participation is generally a good thing, the sheer velocity and scale of this recent surge warrants careful scrutiny. I mean, many of these individuals may not have navigated a significant market downturn before, and they could be more inclined to make impulsive decisions based on incomplete or inaccurate information. And unfortunately, this inexperience can make them more susceptible to these rapid price swings and manipulative tactics that can destabilize the market.
Okay, and then this is all kind of connected to the emergence of these finfluencers on social media.
Interesting.
And the report acknowledges that they've played a bit of a positive role in boosting basic financial literacy. But it also flags the significant risks associated with unverified advice and potential conflicts of interest.
Yeah, for sure.
So how can someone navigate this crazy amount of financial content online and be able to figure out which sources of information are trustworthy and reliable?
That is the million-dollar question in this digital age.
It is.
I mean, the internet has empowered individuals with access to a vast amount of information. But the ability to critically evaluate sources and distinguish credible expertise from opinion or even outright misinformation is more vital than ever.
It is.
While some finfluencers may offer some helpful introductory content, investors need to exercise a high degree of caution before acting on specific investment recommendations. So it's essential to look for credentials, understand potential biases, and always conduct independent research from verified sources before making any financial decisions.
Good advice.
And of course, regulatory bodies are also grappling with how to oversee this rapidly evolving landscape.
The report also draws attention to this notable increase in speculative trading, particularly in complex instruments like derivatives and options. And here's a really sobering statistic. The majority of retail investors who trade in options are actually experiencing losses.
Wow.
Which suggests a pattern of maybe uninformed or excessive risk-taking.
Yeah, that's a little concerning.
What are your thoughts on the appeal and the inherent dangers of engaging in this kind of high-risk, high-reward trading, especially for those new to the market?
Well, what's particularly concerning here is the apparent mismatch between the complexity of instruments like options and the level of understanding among a significant portion of the retail participants. This high rate of losses strongly indicates that many may be engaging in speculation, essentially betting on short-term price movements rather than employing well-thought-out investment strategies. And this kind of activity can not only lead to substantial financial losses for individuals, but it could also amplify overall market volatility and create a more unstable environment.
And despite this overall upward trajectory, the Indian stock market hasn't been immune to volatility. The report points out instances of significant price swings with corrections of 5 to 10% occurring within relatively short periods.
No, that's pretty substantial.
And it also reminds us of past market scandals in India. Figures like Harshad Mehta and Ketan Parekh as important historical lessons about the dangers of unchecked market enthusiasm. and the potential for eventual and sometimes sharp corrections.
Right.
How does this awareness of these past events kind of shape your perspective on the current market dynamics?
If we look at the broader cycles that markets tend to follow,
Right.
these historical episodes serve as critical reminders
Okay.
that periods of rapid growth
Yeah.
and what can feel like unbridled optimism
Right.
can often be followed by significant downturns.
Yeah.
Human behavior in financial markets tends to repeat itself.
Yeah.
You have these periods of excessive exuberance
Right.
that can potentially inflate asset bubbles
Right.
that eventually correct.
Hmm.
And so understanding this history encourages a more measured and cautious approach
Yeah.
to interpreting current market trends.
Right.
And I think it helps to temper that excessive optimism
Yeah.
with a healthy dose of realism.
Okay, so in response to all these developments and concerns,
Yeah.
the report outlines the measures that SEBI has been taking,
Okay.
which include enhanced monitoring of trading activity,
Right.
the implementation of stricter margin requirements for derivatives trading, and increased scrutiny of potentially misleading content from financial influencers.
Interesting.
So what role do you see this kind of regulatory intervention playing in safeguarding individual investors and maintaining the overall stability and integrity of the market?
This raises a fundamental question
Okay.
about the necessary balance between fostering market growth
Right.
and ensuring adequate investor protection.
Yeah.
So regulatory actions like those undertaken by SEBI are essential for maintaining market integrity
Okay.
and mitigating systemic risks by increasing oversight and imposing more stringent rules.
Right.
The aim is to curb excessive speculation and shield less experienced investors from potentially harmful practices.
Yeah.
However,
Right.
it's important to remember that regulation is just one piece of the puzzle.
Okay.
Investor education and individual responsibility
Yeah.
also play crucial roles
Absolutely.
in fostering a healthy and sustainable market.
Absolutely. And that echoes this key message from the report's conclusion.
Okay.
While acknowledging the long-term potential of the Indian stock market, it underscores the need for investor prudence,
Right.
comprehensive financial education,
Yeah.
the adoption of well-considered long-term investment strategies, and as you said, just good old-fashioned due diligence,
Right.
particularly for those new to the complexities of the market.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The report emphasizes that sustainable market growth
Right.
isn't solely about attracting more participants.
Yeah.
It's about fostering a culture of informed and responsible investing.
Right.
While the allure of quick gains through speculation can be strong,
Yeah.
a solid foundation of financial literacy
Right.
and a long-term investment horizon
Yeah.
are ultimately more conducive to both individual wealth creation
Okay.
and overall market stability.
Okay, so wrapping up this deep dive.
Yeah.
We've seen this pretty remarkable transformation in India's stock market.
Right.
Fueled largely by a surge in retail participation
Yeah.
and the pervasive influence of technology.
Absolutely.
But alongside this exciting expansion, there are some legitimate concerns about a potential bubble
Right.
driven by inexperience and maybe a little too much speculative fervor.
Right.
And the report we've discussed really drives home that critical message.
Yeah.
Proceed with caution, prioritize education,
Right.
and always maintain a long-term perspective
Absolutely.
when navigating the world of investing.
I couldn't agree more.
I think that's good advice.
Yeah, I think we've explored some really important aspects here.
Yeah.
We saw how the market's ownership structure has shifted,
Right.
how the investment behaviors of households are evolving,
Right.
and that sort of double-edged nature of technology,
Yeah.
providing greater access, but also potential pitfalls.
Yeah.
The regulatory responses
That's right.
are a significant step,
Yeah.
but ultimately the long-term health and sustainability of this growth
Right.
will depend on the collective wisdom
Mm-hmm.
and the responsible actions
Right.
of all market participants.
And on that note, here's a final thought for you, our listener.
Okay.
Considering everything we've discussed today,
Yeah.
what do you believe is the single most critical factor
Right.
that will determine whether India's stock market growth story
Okay.
becomes a long-term success
Mm-hmm.
or culminates in a market bubble?
Right.
Is it the effectiveness of regulatory oversight
Okay.
in curbing that excessive speculation? Or is it the ongoing development of financial literacy and responsible behavior
Right.
among individual investors?
Mm-hmm.
Or is it the fundamental strength and resilience of the underlying Indian economy itself.
Yeah.
It's certainly something to think about.
A lot to consider there.
It is.
Yeah.
Food for thought.
Absolutely.
All right.
Okay.
Well, thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.
And we'll see you next time.
Sounds good.